Life is hard. Friday was a very difficult day for me. My boss came in a mood. We were short-staffed, and she was tense because we all had to cover for the missing staff. So it added to everyone's work, and in particular mine. Because the other legal secretary was out, so everyone was coming to me for assistance. It was somewhat overwhelming, as my workload doubled, and as a result, my tasks were done a little later than usual, and inevitably, I made a mistake. She was already moody and micromanaging everyone, and when I made that mistake, she jumped all over me. She catastrophized the mistake as if it was the most awful thing in the world. And if you've ever been around someone when they're intolerant, impatient, critical, and judgmental, you know I had a very bad, no good day. Well, I didn't flare back at her. I determined I wasn't going to treat her like she was treating me. But it was very hard to eat humble pie. I apologized for the mistake, but she wasn't satisfied. She kept throwing it up in my face and double-checking everything I did all day long. And I continued to maintain a respectful and quiet attitude. And I was so grateful at the end of the day when she just went into her office and closed the door. Life can be so hard. I want you to know I feel blessed to have this job. But on Friday, I wanted to be anywhere else but at that job. Have you ever felt discouraged and disappointed and depressed and overwhelmed and even in despair because the circumstance you're in has suddenly turned into a bitter pill? You know, when we start a relationship or get a job or a promotion or have a child or earn that achievement or join that group you always wanted to fit in with, things start out so good. There's even a honeymoon period. Everything's so sweet. But what happens to the honeymoon? It comes to an end. And that's because people start to show their areas of weakness, their areas of fear and insecurity and anxiety and impatience, selfishness, insensitivity, and anger. You know, our humanity always colors how we feel about our life and about our blessings. Suffering is real. All around our country, people are going through hardship and loss and destruction of their homes and even their livelihood. I just wanted to point out, I forgot in the praise reports this morning that I'm following Facebook and I saw that Evie posted that Esther and Hector are okay in Puerto Rico. They are being affected by the circumstances, but they're all helping each other out. You know, the neighborhood is helping each other out. The community is helping each other out. And if you know Esther, she's helping everybody out. But life is hard. And when bitter moments happen, we always ask, why? Why did this happen? Why did they have to do that or say that? Why is life so hard? There are 6 things most of us go through that bring us suffering just because we live in this world. I want you to make a mental check of this list as I go through it. Have you ever experienced a traumatic event, a strained relationship, a serious health problem, a crushing disappointment, unchangeable circumstance, something that just won't change, and a painful loss? This is my list. And this is the list that the world has. This is our list. This is why Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, because these things are in the world. a traumatic event, a strained relationship, a serious health problem, a crushing disappointment, an unchangeable circumstance, and a painful loss. That's why it's hard to get through this life. I want to touch on each one of those. A traumatic event. That's an incident that causes emotional, physical, psychological, and spiritual distress. And often those of us who've been touched by abuse, childhood abuse and neglect, or sexual abuse, or domestic abuse, or physical abuse, or been bullied, or a criminal act, or even a natural disaster, we were touched by trauma. When I was 5 years old, I was molested by my uncle. You know, children are easy prey to adults who haven't resolved their sexual issues and needs in a healthy way. And my uncle's actions happened in one night, but it affected my whole life. It affected how I saw myself. It affected how I saw men. It set me up to be fearful and anxious and angry for many years. You know, victims of abuse are often traumatized many years after the incidents, and sometimes they never get over it. So, check off the list if you've been touched by trauma. Another thing that causes suffering in our lives is strained relationships. Even the strongest relationships get off track sometimes because it's stressful living in this world. And we have mismatched expectations and personality differences, and sometimes when we need someone to hold and comfort us, they're not there in those moments when we really need somebody. Friday was a day of strain for me. Now I want you to know I've experienced my boss be very charming towards me. But on Friday, she was not charming. She was attacking. And many of us here are dealing with a strained relationship, one that's characterized by miscommunication and hurt and anger and disappointment. Is there a strained relationship in your life? Someone you're having difficulty feeling close to, someone you feel insecure being around. Do you wonder, are they as committed to you as you are to them? Conflict frequently happens in a strained relationship. So I know that several of us in here are dealing with a difficult person that makes it so hard for you to forgive and move on. Another thing that brings suffering in this world, just from living in this world is broken, is serious health problems. That's something that's touching many of us, and it causes suffering and sometimes despair. You know, 10 years ago, I would meet with the senior ladies of the church. I loved them so much, and I would sit and we'd meet as a group and go out to restaurants and just hang out with each other. And I listened to them talk about many things, so much wise things, but many of the things they talk about would be their doctor appointments. And I would sort of passively listen, but truthfully, other than to encourage them to go to their doctor's appointments, I didn't feel health problems was such a huge concern in my own life. Even though I've struggled with obesity since my childhood, I had perfect pressure, I had good this and good that. I mean, it was hard sometimes on my joints, but I didn't really start feeling the effects of being obese. I was always warned by my doctors, and they would say, you know, you're young now, but the consequences are going to become more damaging as you get older. Well, recently that prognosis came true. I've been struggling for a long while with some symptoms that I just couldn't get rid of. I've gone to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, and they prescribed medications, but the symptoms would never clear up. Then my last doctor, GYN, she said, we're going to go deeper and see if there's something else going on. So they did a biopsy, and the results were not good. The cells came back highly abnormal. And she told me a word I'd never heard before. She said, precancerous. And she said, this is the good news and the bad news. She said, you're nearly at stage 1. But you're not quite there yet, but it's coming. It's at a treatable stage with surgery. And so when you hear the diagnosis, cancer, or MS, or diabetes, or stroke, or even a mental diagnosis, depression, bipolar, whatever, you kind of feel a little knocked down. And that's how I felt. And I went numb, like, no, this can't be happening. But here's the reality in my life. I can't keep my head in the sand about my health anymore. I'm facing something that the doctor said very plainly to me. She said, if you don't treat this, it will kill you. And I know that many of you have been praying for me, and I'm very grateful. And I'm at the beginning. These next several months may be harder than anything I've ever experienced, and you're going to see me take a sabbatical away from ministry for a season as I take care of this threat. And if you want to know how I'm feeling, I feel resolute to do what I need to do. But there are times when I do feel sad and anxious and depressed. All of us who struggle with our health feel anxiety and apathy and drained and depressed by the hugeness of what we're dealing with. It is hard to keep your joy when you're feeling overwhelmed, and this thing in your body is taking away your peace and your ability to function in the way you've always done. So in this world, one of the troubles that it touches our lives is our health, and it can stress us and depress us. Another thing that touches us just from living is a crushing disappointment. This is when your dreams are denied or delayed. You may feel a passion for something, or you want to express yourself in a way that gives you great joy, but that passion never seems to be realized. There's always something that gets in the way. And it makes you just so disappointed, and the denial and the delay of your dream. You've been hoping something on your heart that you set your heart on would just happen, but despite everything that you do, you try this way, you try that way, you go this way, you go that way, and it just won't come to pass. I experienced this when I had my dream of being a school teacher, and when I failed the teaching fellowship program, it was such a crushing disappointment. I not only felt that my dream was denied, I felt it was stolen, because the decision that they made to me was arbitrary. And even though God turned that situation around, and I do feel that I'm where I'm supposed to be, I did go through those moments where my dream was deferred. Another thing that just living in this world brings is an unchangeable circumstance. And that's where no matter what you do, this thing just won't change. Infertility, for example, is an unchangeable circumstance. You find the right person, and you're like, okay, we're going to get married, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have the babies. And then infertility comes in. No matter what you do, it just won't happen. Another unchangeable circumstance is a physical illness or a chronic mental illness. It just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. Having a child with a disability, or being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or losing a part of your body, and these unchangeable circumstances can bring a hardship, and you got to adjust your life to this thing. And it's just is not only chronic, it's a chronic stressor. Our bodies are not working the way we want, or we may be caring for someone whose body is not working or their health is deteriorating. In this unchangeable circumstance, it wearies you and it brings fatigue and anxiety and depression. Just from living in this world, these things touch us. And the last one I'm going to touch on is a painful loss, and that could be death and divorce. These are some of the most painful losses. And there's some people we love them so dearly, and they were so precious to us. And when they died, or there was a traumatic divorce, years later, we're still grieving that loss and that separation. I miss Connie and Susie. You're never ready for a loss. They recently died, for those of you who are here new today. They were two senior ladies that I hung out. They were my crew. And they died within 6 months of each other. And neither of them expected to die, and none of us expected them to die, but they did. And I know every week that I get up here, I mention them because I'm still grieving. There's a hole in my heart. There's a hole in some of your hearts for someone who was so precious. And this thing is not going to change. It's an unchangeable circumstance that you just have to learn to adjust your life around the fact that that hole is there. 6 things. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. These 6 things touch many of us. Each one of them has touched my life. A traumatic event, has that touched you? A strained relationship, is that touching you? A serious health problem, is that touching you? A crushing disappointment, is that touching you? An unchangeable circumstance, and a painful loss. Sometimes when I'm on Facebook, I'll see the anniversaries and the birthdays, but frequently I'll see the anniversaries of Dad and Mom. It's been 20 years, and I still miss them. This was their birthday. They still matter in my life. 20 years later, Facebook. This was the most wonderful person in the world, and she's in heaven, or he's in heaven. That's a painful loss. And this is what makes life hard. And if you think somebody gets a pass, everyone in this room has been touched by one or more or all of these circumstances. These are the troubles of life. No one gets a free pass. We've all been roughed up. And if you haven't been touched by any of these hurts, just keep living. Jesus said, in this life, you will have these troubles. And do you know the hardest thing to deal with when you're going through a season of suffering is that you feel alone. And when we're hit with pain and loss, the most common feeling that we feel is all alone. We think there's nobody here to help us or comfort us or support us or protect us or walk with us or encourage us. We're all alone with this pain and this loss. And that's when we think we got to figure it out ourselves. We got to fix it. And even though we feel alone and overwhelmed, I want to tell you today, there is hope again. Jesus says in Romans 8:35, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And the first thing he says is, shall trouble? Shall trouble? Shall a traumatic event, a strained relationship, a health problem, a disappointment, an unchangeable circumstance, a painful loss, who shall separate us from the love about trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword. And he says in verse 37, no. No. In all these things, all these troubles, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And he says, Paul, who wrote this, he says, I'm convinced. And this is a man who went through everything. He was even killed 3 times, and God rose him from the dead. He said, I am convinced that neither death nor life, angels or demons, the present or the future, any powers, height, depth, nothing in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. I want you to think about that word love. Because you could say, well, if I'm going through all this, what is the love of Christ? That's what you essentially have to hold on to. Because do you know what the love of Christ is? It's his goodness. It's his grace. It's his power. It's his presence. It's his provision, his protection, his healing, his justice, his faithfulness, his total and complete acceptance of you. What shall separate the goodness of God from my life? Nothing shall separate me from the goodness of God, not even a season of suffering. I want you to say that to someone. Just turn to anyone near you and say, nothing shall separate me from the goodness of God. Because that's what the enemy wants you to do. Because when these things touch you, he wants you to start to doubt God, to pull away from God, to pull away from the people of God, to pull away from the Word of God, to pull away from anything that says God.
That's right.
He just wants you to feel small and friendless and unloved and unprotected. But say no to the enemy and yes to God.
Amen. Amen.
Don't let this pain and this loss and this strain and this stress and this trauma pull you towards fear and anxiety.
Yes.
Let it pull you to growth. That's what I had to do. Everything you go through, I go through. God said, grow, Florida. I hated going through that hurt on Friday. Because I want my job to be pain-free zone. I think most of us want some pain-free zones in our life. We want our homes to be pain-free, our families pain-free, our jobs pain-free, our church pain-free, our friendships pain-free. But there's no pain-free where people interact. We all bring our good, bad, and the ugly. Our best and our worst. I've experienced the best of my boss. I've experienced the worst of my boss. It's all added into the mix. Wherever you live, you've experienced the best and the worst. Wherever you work, you've experienced that first day was the best. And now, not so much. And wherever you serve, when you join the ministry, you join the church, that was the best day. And now, up and down, up and down, up and down. And we and loss will visit us regardless of how careful we're trying to keep the peace or walk in peace. Regardless. Just because people are full of fear and anxiety and insecurity and selfishness. That's the sin inside of us that hurts each other. That's why it can never stay smooth. So what we typically do when the pain comes and the hurt and living comes is we try to do two things. Either fight or flight. We try to defend ourselves and fight back, or we try to get away from them as far as we can. Fight or flight. That's our human solution to attack from this world. But it doesn't work. Because as soon as you fight or flight from this condition, you go over here, and guess what? It's right there again. Just a new group of people. So fight and flight for all of you who have thought about it this week, with whatever the stresses of living came into your life this week or this month or this year. Your instinct was fight or flight. What God said to me and what I'm saying to you is grow. Your choice, and you can choose to fight, is not going to solve it. You can choose to flight. You're just going to run into it in another place, in another group of people. There are dead-end ways to fix it. And because God is who He is in our lives, He's just going to allow certain circumstance to happen all over again. Because He wants you to deal with life according to the wisdom of God. Deal with it. That's right. So, how do we hope again when these troubles come upon us? What does it mean to grow through painful circumstances? At first, I just wanted to notice all the things that my boss did wrong. How unprofessional she was, how petty she was, how mean she was, and how unfair she was, and I focused completely on where she was wrong. And then I prayed with a couple of people, and I vented, and then the Lord started to talk. And one of the things in my talk therapy with my prayer support people that came out was, my boss is anxious, angry, and insecure about something. And how do I know that? I know that because the fruit of anger is to attack. And when someone around you is angry, it's because they're feeling, yes, the anger, but they're also feeling anxiety and insecurity. Because you don't attack people for fun, not if you're mentally okay. If you're not a sociopath or a psychopath, if you're attacking somebody, it's because there's some sort of fear. There's something causing that, some sort of insecurity, some sort of anxiety. I don't know if it's from her home. I don't know if there's pressure on her. I don't know what she's going through. All I felt was what I felt. But God started to break through with a little light. And He started to show me that I had neglected praying for the people on my job. And how do you know that you've neglected praying? Because the enemy so quickly turned the atmosphere hostile and strained. And that means I hadn't been praying. I just came here and functioned. But I had not come there and prayed. Now I know what she did was wrong. But God is looking at me, and He said, grow. And the first step He whispered to me in my prayer support team therapy groups is he said, forgive her. Oh, man. Forgive her. You saw what she did, and she did it in front of everybody. And this is the thing that God wants me to grow with. He says, I want you to deal with your heart when you're hurt. But she was wrong, Lord. I want you to deal with your heart when you're hurt. I want you to forgive. I don't feel like forgiving her. Okay. Then you're going to continue to feel this pain. You're either going to be whipped by this pain, or you're going to get over this pain. And the only way through some of the pains in some of our lives is through forgiveness. Don't you know it's hard? But God didn't say this life would be easy. He said, I will do it with you. I'm crying out to the Lord. Give me wisdom, Lord. Give me wisdom. Tell me what to do, Lord. Forgive her. Tell me what to do, Lord. Please, Lord, deliver me. Free me from this, Lord God. Oh, help me, Jesus. Forgive her. Lord, are you not hearing me? Is there someone in your life right now that you've been fighting or flying away from, and God says, I want you to grow. I want you to have faith for me for that relationship and grow and start by forgiving. You see these troubles that he talked about? He said that these troubles have come to us to make us more like Christ. Amen. So what's Christ like? Loving. He's loving. Forgiving. Oh, no. He's wise. He's compassionate. He's kind. He's strong. So we sing these beautiful songs. Make me more like you, Jesus. If you really, really want to be like Christ, you have to grow through pain and loss and stress and conflict and trauma. And you don't grow when you're fighting, and you don't grow when you're flying away. But there are resources that the Lord gives us. How are we doing with time?
Okay, 20.
Okay. The resources that he gives us. He gives us strength. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things, even forgive, through Christ who strengthens me. He gives us renewed hope. Psalm 94:19 says, Lord, when doubts fill my mind, when my heart is in turmoil, when I don't want to do it, quiet me and give me renewed hope.
Amen.
He gives us peace. John 16:33, Jesus says, I told you these things, these troubles, so that you can have peace in me. Not peace in the world, not peace in the relationship. None of those things will secure your peace. He said, you will have peace in me. And in this world you will have trouble, but be brave, for I have defeated the world. And he gives us light and direction. Psalm 119:105. By your words I can see where I'm going, and they throw a beam of light on my dark path. And he gives us a renewed mind and the ability to change how we normally think and act and do it God's way. Romans 12:2 says, do not allow this world, these troubles, to mold you into its own image where you fight, they fight, we all fight. That's what the world wants you to do. They're mean and gossipy and critical and just mean people, and the world wants to make you one of them too. But it says instead, be transformed by renewing your mind. That means turning your mind to, well, what does the Spirit of God say? Well, what does the Word say? Because when you do that, then you will be able to discern what God wills. And whatever God finds good, pleasing, and complete. So for me, I'm going to pray for strength and hope and peace and light and direction and a renewed mind, not to respond the way the world would respond, but respond the way the will of God says for me to respond. And we all need to pray for that strength and hope and peace and light and direction and renewed mind in our situations. And again, the other resource is the Holy Spirit, who's our comforter and our counselor and our helper and our advocate, and He's praying for us, and our strengthener, Jesus, is praying for us. Life is hard. Sometimes life can feel like hell. But there's a difference between hell and hard. And that difference is hope. When you think life is heavenly, you have false hope. And when you think life is hell, you have no hope. But when you think life is hard, that's when you bring this hard life, these troubles that come upon us just from living, and we bring those to Jesus. And He says, I know. In this world, you will have trouble, but be encouraged, for I have overcome the world. The worship team can come up. Let's say the 23rd Psalm together, everybody. Whatever version comes in your mind. There's no wrong version. King James, NIV, whatever. Let's say it together, and if you say shepherd and somebody says pastor, whatever. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not lack. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for His name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod